All right, so let's go ahead and dive into Joshua chapter 3. So this is kind of the culmination of a long period of time, as we'll see as we move through the lesson, as this is where Israel is going to ultimately cross the Jordan River, and this is something that's been talked about in Scripture for a long period leading up to this particular chapter. So we're going to look at this from a fairly historical context with some background, as well as the significance of what's happening. I think often when we think about this particular chapter and the events that happen, we tend to think of it kind of from there's this one miraculous thing that's happening with the water, but there's a lot more going on in this chapter than just what meets the eye at the surface level right there. So we're going to take a look at most of that tonight. So I wanted to start with a brief recap of chapters 1 and 2, just as a refresher for our memories and for those that have been here one of the past 2 weeks. So in chapter 1, this is where we see Joshua having just been appointed as the leader of the Israelites at the end of Deuteronomy. He takes over, leading God's people from Moses, and the people are foretold that they're going to cross the Jordan in 3 days. So the crossing of the Jordan is not something that sneaks up on the Israelites. It's not just the spur-of-the-moment thing. Obviously, they've been promised this land for a long period of time, but even before the immediate event of the crossing of the river, we know that that's going to happen out of chapter 1. And then in chapter 2, as Colton gave us a lesson on last week, this is where Joshua sends out the 2 spies into Jericho. Obviously, he must have learned from the sending of the 12 spies that was not good. So he said, we're just going to send just the perfect number of spies this time. And so the 2 spies go out. They come back with a report after having been saved by Rahab and aided by her through their escape from the king of Jericho. And they return to Joshua with the report that the land is ready to be taken. So the best news that Joshua could have hoped for, it means the fulfillment of God's promise is finally going to come. So to move on from there, I wanted to give just a little bit of background before we really get into the text of kind of where have the Israelites been for the years leading up to this point. And of course, we know that originally God made this promise to Abraham, and we can see the lineage of Abraham displayed there in the graphic, and all of Abraham's sons leading down to Moses ultimately, who had been leading God's people for a long period of time through Egypt, out of Egypt, right up until basically this crossing of the river that we're about to get to. And then from Moses, of course, we see it passed to Joshua as the leader of God's chosen people. A little bit of a break from the paternal lineage that we saw right there, as Joshua is not Moses' son, as we learned a couple weeks ago. And to give a little bit of context to the time that has passed. So, we know based on the scripture that people didn't live the same number of years that we live when we think, what does a lifespan look like? Abraham was 100 when Isaac was born. Isaac was 60 when Jacob was born. Jacob was about 130 when he entered Egypt. And then once the Jews are in Egypt, we have this 430 year period of the Jews waiting to escape the captivity that they're in. To put that in context of time, so we're moving from about 2000 BC roughly to about 1400 BC. So about a 600-year span from this covenant being made with Abraham that God is going to deliver to Abraham this promised land that they've been waiting for before they're actually entering it. So, all said, it's about 600 plus years of waiting. Now, I don't know if anybody can relate to what it means to wait 600 years for something. I know I sure can't. We certainly live in a society where people don't really want to wait for much these days, let alone for a year, 2 years, 20 years. It's hard for us to really fathom what it would be to wait for something to come to fulfillment that is beyond our own lifetime and beyond our children's lifetime and their children's lifetime. So after 600 years, I would imagine there's quite a bit of excitement and buzz in the camp before the Jews are about to step into the water. So just wanted to give a little bit of context there to just give some background as to how long they've been waiting. So let's start out with the first 4 verses here. So if you want to follow along in your Bibles, feel free. It'll also be on the screen there for you. So I'll read Joshua 3, starting in verse 1. Early in the morning, Joshua and all the Israelites set out from Shittim and went to the Jordan, where they camped before crossing over. After 3 days, the officers went throughout the camp, giving orders to the people. When you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God and the Levitical priests carrying it, you are to move out from your positions and follow it. Then you will know which way to go, since you have never been this way before. But keep a distance of about 2,000 cubits between you and the ark. Do not go near it. So a few things here that I'll highlight as some parallels that we see elsewhere in the Scripture. The first being that they're following the ark as it's led out in front of them. This is very similar to when the Israelites are coming out of Egypt and they're following God's presence via the form of the pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire out in front of them, leading them day and night. So that's the first real illustration and parallel that we see to the Israelites coming out of Egypt. To give some perspective as to how far they are away from the ark when it's going out in front of them. 2,000 cubits is about 3,000 feet. For those of y'all that are really kind of familiar with the area, maybe kind of hard to see, but that's kind of from here to the Walgreens over at the Alden Bridge Shopping Center. So it's a reasonable distance. You might be able to see it, but it's going to be pretty far out in front of you. Granted, they are in the desert. There's not this forest or a lot of elevation change for seeing this leading out in front of them. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the Ark of the Covenant, as that's going to kind of play a key role in the miraculous crossing that we're about to see. So I think when most of us think about the Ark of the Covenant, this is probably the first ark that we picture in our mind, which from a general description, kind of what it looks like, is not necessarily too far off. The dimensions are kind of close, but there's definitely some aspects of Indiana Jones lifting up the ark that are not at all scriptural by any means, as there's a lot more going on behind the scenes. So this is definitely the fake Ark of the Covenant. But the real Ark of the Covenant, wanted to dive into a little bit. We first see the Ark as talked about in Exodus 25, when God is giving Moses the instructions for building the ark, all of the dimensions and the materials and how to actually construct it. A few chapters later in Exodus, the Israelites are bringing their goods and materials for the creation of the ark. So they're bringing their gold and their wood and their fabrics and whatnot for the creation of the ark and the creation of the tabernacle. And then in Exodus 37, Bezalel actually builds the ark based on the directions that God had given to Moses. So some things we know specifically about the ark is that it was made of acacia wood. We know that its dimensions were 2.5 cubits long by about 1.5 cubits wide and 1.5 cubits tall. So about 3.5 feet by 2.25 feet tall and wide. So it's a decent-sized rectangular box, not too far off from the movie depiction that most of us are familiar with. We know that it was overlaid in gold, so it wasn't just a wooden box. It had a gold overlay. It was carried via poles through the rings that were made onto the side of the wooden box. We know that the atonement cover, or the lid of the ark, was made of pure gold, or solid gold. And then we know that it had the 2 cherubim statues, if you would, on top of the ark with their wings forming the mercy seat. So some interesting things that are going on with the ark that we generally don't think about is the materials that it's actually made of and what this really means in real life to the people that are interacting with the ark. It's not just this, little cardboard box or this super light thing that they're carrying around. So from the perspective of the gold, I'm just going to kind of throw out a question, and I guess if you know, don't spoil it, but a gold bar like that, does anybody have a guess as to like how much a gold bar like that might weigh? Like what you might see in a movie or in a bank vault or something like that. Any guesses? 35, 2 pounds? 10 pounds, 20 pounds, okay. 20 to 30 is pretty close, and so a gold bar like that weighs about 27 pounds, and I mean, we're talking a gold bar that's, only about this big, fairly small little gold bar, not this, massive behemoth or ark-sized piece of gold by any means. So to kind of multiply that into how it actually ties into the ark itself, gold is about 1,200 pounds per cubic foot. So, a foot wide, foot tall, foot deep, that's going to weigh about 1,200 pounds. And I'm pretty sure nobody in here can lift a cubic foot of gold on their own. Certainly something that would take some assistance. So just to do a little bit of multiplication on that, and I'll spare everybody from the arithmetic behind it, but the lid of the ark is about 8 3/4 square feet, and so they're 3.5 feet long by 2.5 feet wide, and at a mere 1/4 of an inch thick, itty-bitty thin piece of metal there. The lid of the ark alone would weigh about 200 pounds. By no means a small weight, and that's not even factoring in the addition of the cherubim on top or the actual acacia wood box that goes underneath that is also covered in gold, let alone the contents of the ark, the stone tablets that have the Ten Commandments. We don't necessarily know what else was in the ark at this exact point in time, Aaron's staff perhaps, but certainly the ark is not this thing that two guys are just going to get on either end of and lift up off the ground. This is going to take some major assistance of some kind. So there's definitely some miraculous assistance that they're getting from God in this sense. Even 4 guys on their own carrying this ark is going to be quite the feat. You can't really find, of course, exact numbers as to how much the ark weighs, but there are estimates that it might be 600 to 1,200, 2,000 pounds. Certainly something that's beyond the reasonable expectation that these guys are going to be lifting it up, one on each pole, or the ends of the poles, and carrying this through the desert for, what may be miles and miles and miles. So I think we certainly underlook the miraculous help that they're getting from God in just the bearing of the sheer weight of the ark. Obviously, God's presence is with the ark, so I think there's definitely some correlation there to be taken into consideration. So let's move on to verse 5, as the Israelites are now really getting ready to get up to the water there. So Joshua chapter 3, verse 5. Joshua told the people, "Consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do amazing things among you." Joshua said to the priests, "Take of the ark of the covenant and pass on ahead of the people." So they took it up and went ahead of them. So this is really the second key time that we see the Israelites instructed to consecrate themselves. The second being as God's presence was getting ready to come to them out Mount Sinai. We don't necessarily know exactly what the consecration here is, but based on what we see in Exodus, we know that at that time it was primarily a washing of the clothes, but it may have also been some washing of the body would be a natural expectation, perhaps a fasting or abstaining from certain earthly things. But we know for sure in Exodus 19 that there was a washing of clothes that went along with the consecration to help them align themselves with God's thoughts and to get ready for His will and His presence among the people. Certainly a large act of commitment on behalf of the Israelites, as we see here, which they would certainly have to trust that God is going to do what he says he's going to do for them when it comes to the encountering of the body of water itself. So in verse 7, "And the Lord said to Joshua, 'Today I will begin to exalt you in the eyes of all Israel, so they may know that I am with you as I was with Moses. Tell the priests who carry the ark of the covenant, when you reach the edge of the Jordan's waters, go and stand in the river.'" So just a quick hit at some of the parallels that we can see right here between Moses and Joshua. We have Moses leading the Israelites out of Egypt when they're escaping the captivity from Pharaoh. He leads the Israelites right up to the edge of the Red Sea. He follows God's commands on what to do to lead the people through the water. And Joshua pretty much parallels that exactly. Of course, it's more of a delivering into the land of Canaan as opposed to out of the land of Egypt this time, leads them right up to the body of water, the Jordan River, and again, follows God's commands with the consecration as well as the actions of carrying the ark and the ark leading the people. So moving on to verse 9. Joshua said to the Israelites, "Come here and listen to the words of the Lord your God. This is how you will know that the living God is among you, and that he will certainly drive out before you the Canaanites, Hittites, Hivites, Perizzites, Girgashites, Amorites, and Jebusites. See, the ark of the covenant of the Lord of all the earth will go into the Jordan ahead of you. Now then, choose 12 men from the tribes of Israel, one from each tribe, and as soon as the priests who carry the ark of the Lord of all the earth, set foot in the Jordan, its waters flowing downstream will be cut off and stand up in a heap." So to give some geographic context as to exactly where on the Jordan River and in Israel this is happening, I would try to zoom in, but the zoom's not really going to work. But hopefully you can see there on the map the city of Jericho just on the west side of the Jordan River from that red arrow right there. The Israelites are encamped right at about the tip of that red arrow on the east side of the Jordan River. And then on the right side, the more realistic map there, we see the depiction of the Jordan River leading down to the Dead Sea. And we see the crossing site and the baptismal site kind of noted there at essentially the same location. That baptismal site that's noted there is believed to be the baptism site of Jesus. Today it's known as Qasir El Yahud, just a more local dialect term. That is where Bethany beyond Jordan is believed to be. We don't have a more exact location, but I don't think it would be a mere coincidence that we could sit here and say that the believed site of Jesus' baptism, as well as the delivering of God's people through the Jordan River, just happened to be at the same spot. It just seems a little too coincidental to me, but we don't have the true factual detail to know that for certain. So moving on to verse 14. "So when the people broke camp to cross the Jordan, the priests carrying the ark of the covenant went ahead of them. Now the Jordan is at flood stage all during the harvest. Yet as soon as the priests who carried the ark reached the Jordan and their feet touched the water's edge," and I'm going to pause right there before we move on to the second half of verse 15, and really want to highlight in verse 15 that the Jordan is at flood stage, so it's not at its normal river level. So the flood stage is occurring during the spring when the waters from Mount Hermon, which is in northern Israel, are melting from the snow and flowing down, ultimately reaching to the Dead Sea right there. We don't know exactly, of course, what the exact measurements of the Jordan River would have been during this flood stage, but some sources that you can read say at some places it might be all the way up to a mile wide historically, depths probably around average of 10 to 12 feet. So a fairly significant body of water, even if it's not the mile wide, even if it's only a mere fraction of that. This is going to be a fairly raging river. So when we tend to think about the Jordan River or just a general river, this tends to be sort of the depiction that we would see. So this is actually the Jordan River in Israel, just 4 examples of it at its normal flow rate, normal water level. But this is certainly not the Jordan River that the Israelites would have been walking up on and getting ready, at least for the Levitical priests to put their toes in, leading the ark. This is more of the Jordan River that they would have actually encountered. So this is the Jordan River during flood stage in the spring. Certainly some white water. It looks like something you could go rafting on if you want to, and absolutely something that would sweep you away if you were to just get out in the water. So again, not just something they're going to get in and dip their toes in. You're kind of going to have to commit if you're going to put your feet in this water right here. So we certainly see that from the Levitical priests and the faith that they have when they take that first step. So moving on to 16, the water from upstream stopped flowing. It piled up in a great heap a distance away at a town called Adam in the vicinity of Zarethan, while the water flowing down to the Sea of Arabah, that is the Dead Sea, was completely cut off. So the people crossed over opposite Jericho. So Adam is about 20 miles north. So we can see it there on the map on the right of where the believed crossing site is to where that city is. So this is kind of the first big difference as far as the crossing of the water as opposed to the crossing of the Red Sea, where, of course, the Red Sea, they're going through the middle of the body of water, and the water is heaped up on both sides of them as they're crossing through. The Israelites that are going to be those first behind the priests are really not going to see the water. It's going to be far from their vision, some 20-odd miles away. Continuing on in verse 16. We already read 16. So how the actual damming of the water took place, I think it's similar to how we envision the Red Sea. We often think about it in the water just piled up miraculously, like there's this invisible wall, but there is evidence that it was not necessarily just this miraculous piling up of water with an invisible barrier in front of it. That's certainly how we tend to imagine it, but there have been numerous earthquakes over the years in the vicinity of Jericho, the vicinity of Adam. As late as 1927, there was an earthquake in Jericho that created a natural earthen dam in the town of Adam. There was a landslide. The water was completely blocked for about 21 hours before the force of the water cleared out the natural earthen dam that was a result of the landslide. So not necessarily this miraculous thing in the sense of an invisible barrier holding up the water, but certainly something miraculous happening to achieve God's will in the stoppage of the water. It does make you wonder what the people of Adam were thinking when this was happening. Their town was just kind of becoming an ocean in a matter of hours. So it's just kind of a little bit of a curiosity. I would imagine they had a lot of questions of what was going on right there. And then continuing into verse 17, the priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord stopped in the middle of the Jordan and stood on dry ground, while all Israel passed by until the whole nation had completed the crossing on dry ground. So this is, a frequent reference that we see is all Israel, the whole nation. So I wanted to give some perspective and paint the picture of, what did this really look like as the Israelites were getting ready to cross the water right here. And I'll just point out that little picture we see there, obviously that's not biblically accurate with the water right there by the priests or the people just kind of watching as they stepped into the water, as it would have been quite some distance ahead of them. But this is, I think, generally what we think about when we think, okay, what does the Israelites wandering through the desert for 42 some odd years look like? This community of nomads, probably a few tents, as well as their own individual dwellings. But this is probably pretty far from what it actually looked like, and there's a lot of scriptural basis for that. So first, I just kind of wanted to highlight for us all I mean, how many people are we actually talking about as they get ready to cross? So, if we just think about our geographic area that we're in and that we reside in, I just pulled these numbers off of census.gov. In total across all of the general surrounding area. And I know we have members from our congregation that are from each one of these neighborhoods. This is about 467,000 people across the entirety of that list right there. This is pretty far from how many people it actually was crossing the Jordan River. We're not even really close to how many Israelites this was. So we know that from the first census that was taken, which is in Numbers chapter 1, verses 1 through 45, gives an accounting from each of the 12 tribes, how many men of fighting age there was. And we know that the total across all of the 12 tribes of just the fighting men, not including the Levites, is about 603,000 people. It's kind of hard for us to imagine what a crowd of that size is like. Even if you go to a professional sporting event, you're not even getting anything close to this. You might get 100,000 at a big college football game or something like that, but just the men of fighting age, we're talking over 600,000 people. And then there's a second census that we see in Numbers chapter 26. So the first census being taken out Mount Sinai shortly after the Exodus, and the second census taken pretty close to the end of their time wandering here in the desert, really not too far from where we see ourselves here in Joshua chapter 3. A little over 600,000, 601,000 or so men of just fighting age. And again, that's no women, that's no children, that doesn't count any of the Levites. So estimates put it somewhere probably closer to 2 to 3 million total people, which is roughly the size of the city of Houston, not just our local area. So we have to kind of slow down and imagine what it's like for the Levitical priests standing in the river for what's probably a fairly lengthy number of hours as the Israelites are walking by them, man after man, woman after woman, for a very long time. We don't know how long the crossing took specifically, but this is not something that occurred in 5 minutes or 10 minutes or the exiting of a stadium or something to that effect. This is going to be some number of significant hours. And just as the high priest went before the Israelites and held back the waters, we see great parallel to this in Jesus coming before us and holding back the waters of sin and death in our own lives. So there's a great amount that we can draw from Joshua chapter 3 as it applies to our own day-to-day walk in the faith that we see the Israelites have as they are crossing the river. Just as we get up and we cross the river every day. It may be an encounter that we have with a neighbor or a coworker, but God is going to give us the strength that we need to help that interaction achieve His will. So that's what we see here happening in chapter 3. So if we had to take one thing away from chapter 3, it does happen to be one of the shortest chapters in Joshua, is that the Lord delivers on His promises, even if they're 600 years plus in the making. It's not something that it just happened overnight. They didn't get 3 days of warning. This is something that happened a long time in the making. But these Israelites got to experience the fulfillment of God's promise that He made to Abraham. And we can look forward to chapter 4 and what it's going to be like for them when they actually get there. What their experience is going to be, and how the faith that they've had in God to get them across the water has played into what they're about to accomplish in the upcoming chapters. So that was our lesson for tonight. Any questions or comments or other things we'd like to expound upon? All right. Well, thank you for everybody's attention. I know we're a few minutes early, but take some time to visit with your neighbor, say hello to someone that you're not familiar with, and get to know the rest of the congregation here. So thank you all.